My family has passed on generation over generation of trauma onto each other because of the addiction that they've been struggling with. I couldn't rely on anybody but myself. And it manifests in different ways. So my manifestation came through, I became a hyperachiever. And so there's that one trend that you can see. At this enlightenment moment, I guess, I get in my car and I'm sobbing. And the only phrase that keeps repeating in my head is, God is real. God is real. God is real. And he's talking to me. And so I drive home and I order my first Bible from Amazon.
Welcome to Faith Over Addiction podcast, where the chains of fixing and striving are broken and joy is rediscovered in Christ. You are here because you know there's more for you, a life beyond addiction's chaos, rooted in God's peace and promises. This is the place where Christian women like you learn to release the weight of fixing and striving and instead lean into God's strength to create a home filled with love, grace, and hope. She is clothed with strength and dignity. Proverbs 31:25. That's you. You may not feel like it yet, but you are stronger than you know. And God has so much more for you than carrying someone else's addiction. Here, we'll uncover how to set healthy boundaries with love and a little humor. Find resilience and grace in the messy moments of life. Celebrate small victories and embrace joy like never before. Lean into God's promises for restoration and strength because He's not done with your story or your loved ones. This is your invitation to rise up, embrace your worth in God's kingdom, and take back what's been stolen by addiction, your peace, your joy, your future. Your faith is the foundation and your boundaries are the bridge, and God's truth is your guide. I'm Tanya Gioia, your host and fellow traveler on this journey through the chaos of addiction. I'm here to cheer you on, equip you with tools that work, and share the truth that's changed my life. The joy of the Lord is your strength. Nehemiah 8:10. Together, we'll uncover how to create safe, loving space for healing, starting with your own heart and home. By setting boundaries, trusting God's plan, and embracing His truth, you can reclaim your joy, your peace, and your family's future. Then you will be able to stand firm for your family and legacy as a kingdom daughter, a woman who can laugh at the days to come, knowing her identity is secure in Christ. So grab a cup of coffee or tea and get comfortable. Let's walk this journey together. We're about to take back what's been stolen, create a safe, healing space for you and your family, and rediscover the joy God has waiting for you. Welcome to Faith Over Addiction. I'm Tanya Gioia, and I am here with Ana Megrelishvili, and I am so excited that she's here. We are really focusing this January on how to bring your identity back in line with Christ. Know that you are loved, cherished, forgiven, cared about. So Ana, give us a little bit more about who you are and how you came into this space.
Absolutely. So I'm originally from Eastern Europe. I grew up in the country, Georgia. That's where my family is from. And now I live in the state, Georgia. But my story began in a very difficult upbringing. So my family has passed on generation over generation of trauma onto each other because of the addiction that they've been struggling with. So especially on my father's side, every single man in my family, from grandfather who I knew, have struggled with alcoholism, and some of my uncles also have struggled with drug abuse. And so I was really the first person who has broken that cycle. And so I've worked really hard on healing myself. And now I really enjoy sharing my story because I really pray that my story can encourage your listeners in knowing that if they're in this difficult situation now, that there is light at the end of the tunnel and then they can get out. And, nothing that happens to us is purposeless, because I truly believe that even my pain, God can use for his glory and for his goodness. And that's the message that I'm sharing. And I wasn't Christian most of my life. I actually was atheist and very angry with God because of everything that I have experienced. So me being Christian really happened only about 4 years ago. And so I don't want any of you to think that, oh, it's easy for you to say because you've had this faith all your life, because I didn't. I've really struggled majority of my life until I found God, and he really provided the ultimate healing.
Take us back into when you were living in the country of Georgia and struggling as an atheist. What were your thoughts on God? What was happening for you?
So back then, I was honestly angry with God. I
Mhm.
thought, if there is God who has allowed for me as an innocent child to experience all this abuse and all this trauma and pain, then I want nothing to do with this God. And so I was really rejecting anything that had to do with faith, with religion. God was really not part of my family. It was very cultural Orthodox Christianity. So um, in my country where I was growing up, if you were to survey people, something like upward of 96% of people would say they're Christians. But
Mhm.
it's not really the case. It's really cultural Christianity. So people follow a lot of rituals and traditions without really understanding who Jesus was, what he did for our salvation, or why we're doing these different rituals at church. And my family was no exception. Like, we would go and do certain rituals, like for Easter, we would dye eggs, and but I had no clue why we dyed them red, right? Why, what did it mean? What does Easter mean? Who was Jesus? Nothing. And as I was learning more from other survivors of different traumatic experiences, I've learned that there is this pattern that many of us have experienced, this anger and resentment because we blame God for allowing all this negative things to happen to us. So I'm sure somebody out there is probably nodding as they're listening to this, because it's just very, very common. So that happened. And really, I learned for majority of my life that I can only rely on myself. I couldn't
Mm,
rely on my family.
right.
My family
Common
was,
theme. Common
yeah,
theme with trauma and alcoholism and all.
right.
Yes.
So, I couldn't rely on anybody but myself. So, and it manifests in different ways. So, my manifestation came through, I became a hyperachiever. And so there's that one trend that you can see. So we overcompensate, right? Because of everything and all the baggage and trauma. I experienced a lot of hunger and poverty because my father was often going off on his drinking binges. My mother was stay-at-home mom, so he would leave us just really destitute with no food, no money. Um, During my first 10 years, we actually were also an immigrant family. So we moved from Georgia to Russia. And so we had no real contacts, no family where we were living. And so it felt very isolating, very lonely.
Mhm.
And I just remember I was 8 years old, and my my brother was about 1 years old. So she was staying with him, and she sent me out in the street so I could collect bottles to take to
Mhm.
recycling plant to get some money, and so I could buy us some bread. I was 8, and you can imagine the shame of like hoping that none of your classmates can see you as you're digging through garbage looking for, those bottles. And so I just clearly remember, even at that young age, I said, I'm never going to be poor when I grow up. I will
Mhm.
do anything to make sure that I don't repeat this story. And Very often I felt like a stranger in my own home. I was like, how did I felt like I didn't belong. Sometimes like
Mhm.
I was like, this is not my family. Like I just got here by accident, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so when I became this hyperachiever, there were really only two pathways for me to get out of my situation. So back then in Eastern Europe, I would say women's role was kind of think how it was in the 1950s in the US when I was growing up. It's a lot different now, but basically, especially in small towns where I was from, we were told as a woman, your future is to get married and have children and be stay-at-home mom, right?
Mhm.
And for me, because we were poor, there were two pathways for me to get out of poverty. It's either try to marry up,
Mm.
but I've also seen very dysfunctional families all around me. And I was like,
Mm.
that's not a very stable plan. Or I had to really work hard through education to get out of it. And I
Right.
had to be the best. Okay. And so I chose that path. And I just remember I had this aha moment. And back then, I didn't realize that that was the first time that God spoke to me. I only realized that now, hindsight, when I actually know who God is.
Right.
So I was about 13 and
Mhm.
I was standing in the schoolyard. And I don't have a lot of memories from my childhood that are very vivid, but
Mhm.
this particular one is just very, very vivid. So I remember what I was wearing, like just what weather it was and everything. And it was this moment when suddenly all this like hustle and bustle of the streets and children playing just got quiet. And there was this voice that back then I thought it was my voice that
Right.
said, "You are meant for more than this life." That was the message, okay?
Did you take it in?
I did. And so that was the message that really lit the fire in my soul. And I was like, I'm going to get out of this. I'm not going to, even though I was told my future is to be a wife and a mother and stay at home, I was like, I am meant for more than this life, right? But the message was, you are meant for more than this life.
Mhm.
So think
Mhm.
about it. If it was me, why would I speak to myself in not in the first tense, right?
Right.
But back then, I didn't realize that this was the first time that God has spoken to me.
Mhm.
But that was the moment that really transformed and changed my life. And so I tell this story often because I want people to know that even when we don't believe in God and we don't accept him, he still can speak to us and he still
Amen.
can work through us. And nothing is too big or too small for our God. And so I'm grateful that even though I rejected him, he still was a loving father who gave me that message of encouragement when I needed it.
Now
And
at
so really, yeah, go ahead.
13, at
Hmm.
13, you're getting this message. You've already had to be very adult. I mean, you're scavenging for
Yes.
bottles and you're helping provide food. You've already had to be very adult. What was it like to get that message, to be affirmed, and to be, you felt it was you. So
Hmm.
did you self-sabotage that message? Did you say, nope, this is me and I'm going to go forward? What practical steps did you then begin to take to affirm yourself?
That was the moment when I said, I'm going to prove all of you wrong. So
Nice, nice.
so I said, I am not going to be a stay-at-home mom. Because
Mhm.
everybody, even my own family, imagine, would tell me, oh, don't even bother. You're going to get married and pregnant at 16.
Mm.
My own
Mhm.
family would instill these messages that I'm not good enough except to be somebody's wife and mother. But
Mhm.
I said that message was like fire. I was like, nope, I'm going to prove all of you wrong. And I started any type of opportunities, I was just hanging on to it, advancement in school, different competitions. I was participating in all. And that
Mm.
led to something that really changed my life 3 years later. So 3 years later, I actually got selected as a finalist in this exchange program that was sponsored by the US State Department. So
Oh,
they actually brought me to the United States as an exchange student to live with a family for a year. And God was really amazing because he placed me inside of this incredible Christian family. They were much older, all of their kids were grown,
right.
and they were almost at retirement age. But they were the first example I have ever seen of a healthy family where a woman has a voice, there's no abuse that's happening, there's love, there's respect. And I also experienced the US culture and how women have a role in this society and we can have jobs and opportunities. And I was like, oh, this is it. I will do anything I can to come back to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, but based on the contract that I signed, I had to leave a year later after my program was done, and I wasn't allowed to come back for 2 years based
Oh my
on the
goodness.
requirement. Yes.
So let's back up just a minute.
Mhm.
When you got this opportunity, did your family get behind you, or were they fearful? What was their response?
That's a good question. So I actually had to hide it from my family for most of it because I knew that they would discourage me from going forward.
Okay.
The time I had to tell them was really at the end of it when I was already one of the finalists. And at that point, you had to get just consent forms signed by your parents. And the way I did it, and I mean, think about this. I was a teenager, but I was still strategically plotting how I need to work it to make
Right.
sure I go. I knew
Yeah.
my father was a very controlling and he would not want to let me go.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of approaching him, I actually approached my mother and my grandmother. And I said, I need your help. I need all three of us to really pressure him to let me go because this is an opportunity of a lifetime. And I also knew, imagine at 16, I knew the way we need to play it is on his ego. Like, make sure tell them how much prestige it's going to be on his name, that his
Yes.
daughter went to the United States. And this is how we played it so that he
Uh-huh.
would allow me to come to the US. And he did.
Wow. Wow. Because your thought was he would say, no, you're just a girl. You need to
Mhm.
stay here. You need to help your mother. Because at this point, you're an
Yes.
adult, really. You're 16 and you could do a lot of things for the family. Did you have anybody inside the school or an extended family member who encouraged you, even just a little bit?
The only person was my grandmother on my maternal side. So she was really just the light for me. She really encouraged me to study, and she was the one who really did everything I possible to allow me to go to the United States. I mean, she had to really expedite back then. Georgia was very bureaucratic. So to get like an international passport, you had to have connections, you had to give bribes. Like it was just really, really different than it is now. And
Mhm.
so she really just helped me get everything done to make sure that I would come. And so I'm so incredibly grateful for her because she was really the only person when I was growing up.
Wow. And was she still of the same culture of got married young, had kids, never had an occupation?
Actually, no. So my grandmother was really a rule breaker. So she was very different. I mean, she didn't follow any of the traditions. She was really a lot of the times talk of the town because, she got pregnant out of wedlock. She had a lot of trauma herself, but because of, she had to really play of a role of a man and a woman for my mother to raise her. She had to have a job, she had a career, and so, but she was very more masculine, I think, for a woman because she just had to fulfill both of those roles, but she didn't really fit in that mold. Even though people really like to talk about her, honestly, like she's the person who showed me that so what that you're not fitting in the society, you can still be an amazing woman.
Hmm. So you come to the States, you're in a Christian family. You would have said you were Christian before you came, it sounds like. When was the encounter with Jesus to where you really knew this was a real person?
So this was really recently. This was about 4 years ago. So it was October of 2020. And I don't really know why that particular night I woke up in the middle of the night. So I typically sleep through the night. That's not something that happens to me. And before then, I have never prayed. But that particular night, for some reason, I felt compelled to pray. And I didn't know how to pray. So I said something like, God, if you exist. And then I asked a question. I said, what's my purpose in this life? Because back then, I was going through this kind of stage where my priority of wealth acquisition and just working a lot and making money was not bringing me a lot of fulfillment.
Mm.
And I started questioning, like, there has to be more to life than just me, climbing the corporate career ladder and making money and what, that there's really no fulfillment that I'm getting after I acquire the next bigger thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I said that prayer, and something really supernatural happened. So there was an audible voice in my room that gave me a specific message. And the message was, go to the store, prepare food, feed the hungry. Just that sentence.
Wow.
And, of course, you freak out when you hear, and you're like, I was no exception. I was pinching myself. I was like, am I awake? Like, did I make this up? And then I was like, I gotta go to sleep and I will figure this out in the morning. I can't, this is too freaky. So somehow I managed to go to sleep. And the next morning I woke up and I feel like, oh no, something did happen last night. I feel it. So I call into work and I say, I can't come in today. I need to take a personal day. And I go to the store and I buy up supplies, come home, and I prepare just like sandwiches and fruit and water, and prepare this 24 bags of lunches. I put them all in this big bag, put it in my car, and in my city, so I live in Atlanta, Georgia, we have a lot of homeless sitting in the street in downtown area. And
Mm-hmm.
so I said, okay, I'm going to go down there. And every time I would see somebody who was in the street, I would stop and I would say, hey, would you like some lunch? And if they said
Why
yes,
am I
give
not
them.
surprised you did this all by yourself and didn't invite anybody to come with you?
I know, which hindsight is probably
You
not the
have
safest
enormous
thing.
courage right
Yes.
here in downtown. So I lived in the Buckhead area. Downtown Atlanta can be a little sketch.
Yes, exactly. So, but I was just like, I'm just going to follow at this. And so I was doing it for about an hour. And then I see suddenly there's like this big group hanging out in the street. So I parked my car and I'm counting them, like how many people are there. And then I'm counting the number of bags of lunches I have left. And I kid you not, I had exact number. And I was like, wow, this is really weird.
Yes.
So I take the whole bag and I walk over there and I said, hey guys, I just made some lunches. Would you like some? Like, yes, everybody's happy. So I'm giving them all out, right? So I'm done. I think, okay, I fulfilled what I was told. I was literally about to get in my car, and suddenly one of the homeless ladies is calling me and she says, honey, come over here. So I walk back over and she looks at me and she says, I have a gift for you, like very seriously. And I was like,
Wow.
okay. So she has this big bag where all of her belongings are in this one bag. And so she's looking and looking like through this for this thing that she wants to give me. And then finally she finds it. And so she pulls it out and she hands it to me. And it's a little bird made out of clay. So it's a little sparrow.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at it, and on its chest, it was written, now in God's hands. And I don't know what happened in that moment,
Wow.
but I just burst into tears
Yeah.
because something just like, just I had this enlightenment moment, I guess. I get in my car and I'm sobbing. And the only phrase that keeps repeating in my head is, God is real. God is real. God is real. And he's talking to me. And
Right.
so I drive home and I order my first Bible from Amazon.
Oh my goodness. Okay, no, wait. This is all in a 24-hour span. One, you don't even believe that God is real. You have this
Yeah,
audible voice and you follow through with it all by
yep,
yourself. You didn't
nope.
call your mama, you didn't call a friend. You called into work and said, "I'm not coming in today," and went by yourself. This is the same as the 8-year-old out by herself,
Yep.
grabbing bottles and stuff by yourself to deliver lunches. And God presents you with
Mhm. A
a gift.
gift. Yeah.
That's
And
amazing.
isn't it so beautiful? I thought that God just did such a beautiful job in crafting the story because in our society, homeless people are often considered to be on the bottom of the societal pyramid, right? We just discard them. And yet, a homeless woman has helped me to find God.
Yes. Yes. You are part of I started saying this several years ago, and I don't practice it as well as I want to, is who have I decided I cannot hear Jesus from because of how they look or how they dress or what they've done or
Mm,
who they've been or whatever? Where have I already got this preconceived notion that I couldn't possibly hear Jesus from that person?
mhm.
And there you are going out and feeding the poor, which he told us will always be with us, that
Yes,
we are responsible for. And you get what I'm assuming is the most precious gift of your life.
exactly. Exactly. I just got chills and yes, and it's very interesting because eventually God leads me to quit my corporate job. I went on this year-long sabbatical seeking God's purpose, and He led me to what I do now, where actually I work on mentoring the homeless. And so
Mhm.
He brought the whole story full circle, right? He wanted to make sure that there's this beautiful story that I can share with everyone on how God is the most creative person we have in this universe and how he crafted my story where I was on the verge of becoming homeless. I rejected him, and then eventually he brought me to him through a homeless woman, and eventually he showed me what my purpose was, and that's to help the homeless through the work of my foundation. And so to me, this is just a beautiful, beautiful story that he crafted, and I'm just very honored to share it.
And tell us more about the foundation, what it is, what it does.
Mhm. So, okay, the backstory about it is kind of a little bit supernatural as well. So I've had two encounters with God that I'm very grateful to share. First one I just shared. The second one was at the end of my sabbatical year. I still didn't quite clearly know what God wanted me to do. So I started going on silent retreats.
Mm.
So I would go to monastery and, no phone, no interaction with the outside world, in complete silence, and just really pray and seek God's wisdom. And so during my first silent retreat, I actually wrote my first book in 2 days.
In
Uh, 2 days.
2 days. That's
Mhm.
amazing.
Yeah, so it felt like really a download. So it's called Finding Courage to Change. And I wrote about 4 generations on my mother's side and 3 generations on my father's side, and how generational trauma just gets passed on and the story repeats itself until you have the cycle breaker. And then I talk about the healing that I've done. I've done a lot of different types of therapies, and just really, I think a lot of the times people don't share the stories, the ups and downs of healing journey. So
Hmm.
it's very raw, very honest experience, and me hoping that people can see that no matter the circumstances, your future can be different. So that happened, and 2 months later, on my second silent retreat, God showed me this vision. It was almost like this business plan that came together on this foundation and how it needs to come together. And I really didn't know how to do it because back then I had very few Christian contacts because I was atheist most of my life. I
Right.
wasn't famous, I wasn't rich. So I really fell down on my knees and sobbed. And I said, Lord, like, who am I? I don't know how am I going to put this. Because he basically is telling me, you're going to solve homelessness issue in this country through this program. And this is how
Mhm.
we need Christ and we need community. And together, this is how it's going to be solved. And then I, said, okay, if this was a 5-year plan and this God showed me what's going to be, let's say, in 5 years, what would be my first step and how would I get there? And I said, okay, I need to build my Christian community. And
Mm.
so I started Christian Professionals of Atlanta, and which became a networking organization here in Atlanta. So I started really meeting every month and bringing community of Christians from all denominations to come together and meet each other. And we also focused a lot on philanthropy. So we featured different Christian nonprofits. We did a lot of volunteer projects. And so the following year, I said, okay, I'm ready to start taking this concept maybe nationally.
Mm.
But then the first request to start a chapter came from the country Brazil. And
Oh,
so I was like, okay, Lord, so I guess you want this organization to go not just nationally, but worldwide.
but international. Let's go.
So instead of rebranding to become Christian Professionals of America, we rebranded and became Christian Professionals Network Worldwide. So
Wow.
then, I started preparing really on opening new chapters. So there's a lot of work that goes into, franchising the concept, and I was working on that for the first quarter. But then, before I make any major decisions, I still go on silent retreats and I ask for God's guidance. And it
Hmm.
was interesting because in May of last year, I went and God's message was, now is not the time for expansion. Now is the time to start the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, Lord, let's do it. So then we launch a foundation side of the organization. So it's still under the same umbrella of Christian Professionals Network Worldwide, but now we have also a nonprofit arm. So the way that we structured now is that we partnered with the homeless shelter here in Atlanta.
Hmm.
And we have Christian professionals as mentors paired with homeless families in that shelter. And
Hmm.
so what we learned that number one reason why people become homeless in the United States is what's called relational poverty. And what that means is lack of genuine connections like family, friends, faith community. And so while, homeless shelters provide a lot of physical needs for them, that piece of relational poverty is really not fixed. And so that's where we're coming in as that missing puzzle piece to the whole picture. And we come with the love of Christ because, if you have Christ as your foundation, then your attitude about yourself, about work, everything changes. And
Right.
so you need both. And so we operate with the model of Christ plus community.
Hmm.
And so we just, started. We're less than 6 months, but we already launched our first cohort and we're recruiting more. And our goal is by the end of this year to really partner with every homeless shelter and pair every willing person with a mentor so that then we can start taking it nationally and growing it in other major cities because we do believe that there is a need nationally and people should not feel alone and isolated because God created us to be in community.
Wow. Wow. And I think we can tie this back into the addiction piece too, in that the relational poverty is what you felt as a child when you said, I walked into my home and I didn't
Yes.
even feel like I
Mhm.
belonged here.
Absolutely.
How did you begin to find people to connect with? Because you had a whole corporate career, you had other things going on too.
Yeah, so I had a aha moment. I've lived like a lone wolf for a long time.
Mhm.
So I didn't trust people. I kind of, I had a few friends, but really very few, didn't let people in. And I lived in the state Kentucky for 10 years. And then I came to Atlanta about 6 years ago. And you know what's interesting? After 10 years, I really didn't have many friends in that city. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do it differently. I think this time I want to build community. I want to let people in. I don't want to
Mhm.
be alone anymore. And if people knew me now, because now, just to give you a perspective, I meet about 450 people per year, meaning have coffee, have conversation, not just meet,
Right.
my network is really vast. But when I came to Atlanta 6 years ago, it was just, I knew one person in Atlanta.
Mhm.
That's it. Right. And I feel so much more happier and fulfilled having this community, because I do believe that there's so many examples in the Bible why we were created as community. I mean, even Jesus surrounded himself
Yeah.
with, like-minded people who became his apostles. So we were meant to be in community. And coming back to addiction, we're starting with homelessness, but there's other groups who also experience relational poverty. And so we believe that the same model, as our growth continues, will be applied to other vertical markets, such as addiction. People who've been incarcerated, they come out, and oftentimes, sometimes veterans that are
Mm.
out and
Yes.
deployed for a long time, they come back, and these groups just feel very isolated and alone. And all of them need this feel of community, mentorship, support, knowing that they're not alone, that God cares about them. Even if they don't believe in God, having somebody who does, and
Yeah.
he or she can tell you about it and support you. And there's, I now realize, people have been in my life who were Christians when I wasn't. And I always felt like they were different. And I couldn't really understand why, but they were kinder. They were always more giving to me and more patient. Um, and even though I didn't believe, I still gravitated toward them. So you don't
Hmm.
have to be a believer to recognize that there's this certain light in somebody who is, and be drawn to it. And who knows, right? People, my host family prayed for my salvation for over 10 years
Yes.
before, I became a Christian. So having somebody who prays for you is so important also.
Isn't that something that you think about often? So my mother passed away 4 years ago. She was a prayer warrior like none other. I had grandmothers who were like that too. And I'm glad that you brought that up. We think, oh, well, all that's left is prayer. No, prayer is the first thing. Prayer is
Mm-hmm.
the first thing there. And if you were to go back and you ran into a young lady just like you at 8, at 13, at 16, you ran into her, but how would you mentor her mother now so that she could mentor that girl? What would you say to the mother of that girl so that she could begin to mentor her and be there for her?
Yeah, I think a lot of mothers don't realize the effect that they have on their daughters. They don't realize that how they allow others to treat them is how their daughter is most likely going to allow others to treat her. And so I think it's really important to heal mothers first, so that they can be the good role models for their daughters. Because speaking from personal experience, my mother was constantly abused by my father. And so that created in my youth a lot of problems in my self-image, in how I believed men are supposed to treat me. And for the longest time, I lost respect for my mother, because I saw her allowing for all of these horrible things to happen to her without any consequences to my father. And so it
Mhm.
really breaks the relationship between a mother and a child. So I definitely always go and talk to different groups. So I often go to women who've been either gone through human trafficking or been sexually abused, and tell them my story, because I want them to get motivated to get help. because if they heal themselves, they can break that cycle of trauma, because it will get passed on otherwise.
And to hear your full story, we'll put these links below, but the name of your book.
It's Finding Courage to Change.
And you said this was the first book. Is there another one too?
Yes, so I actually also co-written a book with Jack Canfield, who written Chicken Soup for the Soul. You might know him.
Yes.
So we did a joint project with entrepreneurs who have interesting stories on how they became entrepreneurs, and it's called Success Redefined. And so I talked about my journey of leaving the corporate world to pursue my purpose.
That's fantastic. So you can both hear in her first book, you can hear her very personal story. And in the second book, because I know there are all kinds of women, especially with the advent of the internet, all of those things, that it is the financial constraints that keep them in a relationship that maybe they should have ended, or that they could make better because they are choosing to do better for themselves rather than to maintain the status quo. And I was just talking with another podcaster about the silver divorce phenomenon that's going on, and that after 55, a woman will lose close to 80% if she's been in a long-term marriage. So there's an economic piece that's even, we talk about homelessness with addiction, but there are a lot of families, probably closer to 70%, where addiction is experienced, but it's not to the homeless level. So women will often say, I'm okay. I still have a roof. I still have a food. I still have this. When really, like you said, if they're able to grasp their worth, they're able to grasp who they are in Christ, they can start making legacy changes for the whole family.
Absolutely.
So how has your family changed with you doing what you're doing?
So my family, the biggest thing that happened when I came to the United States the second time, when I finally immigrated, I got full scholarship to come to college. That was really the final straw, where suddenly I was kind of an emotional crutch for my mother for my entire life. And suddenly that crutch was removed because I was no longer there to diffuse the situation. Now I am in this different country. My mother finally was able to divorce my father probably 9 months after I left the country. And so she finally stopped, getting abused herself. And I was able to separate myself from that side of my father's side of the family, because it's such a dysfunctional family that I really don't know. It has to be a miracle. I pray for them. To give you a perspective, the reason why I finally quit my corporate job was because my father's side of the family ended up being in national news in my country, because my grandfather killed his own son, stabbing him 30 times in his sleep. And the reason why that happened is because when he was young man with children, my father, my uncle, he used to abuse them. And when they grew up, the abused became the abuser, because my grandfather gotten older and his son's gotten stronger. And so then his son started abusing him until he finally mentally snapped and just chose to take such a horrible sin upon his soul and kill his own son. And so how do you this is the culmination of this trauma that just gets passed on. And I pray for them. I pray for them often, because it's just they're so tied in that trauma and that sin, that I just don't know, except God's grace, how they can get out of it. And by more of us getting out of it and really saying no more, I don't want to be associated with this experience anymore.
So you stepping out began to free your mother. I'm sure there are ripples in there as well that you're probably not even aware of, that are beginning to spread out. And then you're taking this story. So when you sit with a homeless person, you can sit with them heart to heart.
Exactly. I think the biggest thing I can do and biggest service is sharing my story, right? Because most people, when they see me now, they don't even realize everything else that I've gone through, because they see the shiny package, right? That what I'm doing now, but I share it so that they know I don't come from that. I had to work really hard to get out of it. It's work. You have to commit to your healing. God is a miracle worker. He can transform anybody. Look at me. And he can transform through anybody. And so to never lose hope, that I'm sure many of your listeners are right now praying for their family members and maybe losing hope, saying, well, where is God? Why is he not answering my prayers? Well, look at me. It took my family in the US over 10 years of prayer before I found salvation, and so God works at his own time. His ways are not our ways. And I want you to not feel discouraged, because you never know, and he can do anything.
Amen. Anna, tell us where we can learn more about your foundation, what you're doing, you personally, grab the book, all those things. And we'll, of course, have all those links below the podcast.
Yes. All of the information is actually on one website. So it's very easy in different tabs that you can check out everything that I'm doing. And it's cpnworldwide.com.
Anna, thank you so much for being so brave and courageous and to listening to God. Think about if you hadn't listened as a young lady, if you hadn't listened as a young woman, how many of us would have said, I didn't really hear that, and gone on to work?
Yes.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you for being so faithful. And I really appreciate you being on the Faith Over Addiction podcast today.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Thanks so much for tuning into the Faith Over Addiction podcast. Remember, nothing changes until something changes. Today is your day to step out in faith and make a difference. You are a daughter of the King, a woman who can spark incredible ripple effects of hope and healing, not just in your own life, but in your family, your community, and God's kingdom. If this episode encouraged you, bless someone else by sharing it. Send it to a friend who needs a little hope, or post it on Instagram and tag me. I'd love to hear what resonated most with you. And hey, if you're ready to reclaim your God-given identity and create a safe, loving space for yourself and those you care about, let's talk. Book a quick call with me today, and I'd love to hear your story and help you take the next step. Oh, and don't forget to head over to Apple Podcasts, search for Faith Over Addiction, and leave me a review. Your feedback not only makes my day, but helps other women find this podcast and step into freedom too. You are strong, you are loved, and the joy of the Lord is your strength. Nehemiah 8:10. Until next time, keep walking boldly into the life God has for you.